Misumi Makoto, a young boy, begins to narrate his adventures on an isekai journey. After a normal daily routine, he decides to have a long night's rest. While sleeping, he notices he is no longer in the comfort of his bed and sees himself floating in the sky. He meets a god, the ruler of the realm of night, Tsukuyomi, who tells him that his parents aren't human, but Itseki, and makes him a hero. He casts him off to another goddess. The goddess, who is so rude, places all sorts of unpleasant curses at him, and he gets cast off to another world known as the Wasteland. After 3 days of walking without meeting any humans, he finally meets a Highland orc, who he saves from a creature known as Rizaud. The Highland orc, known as Emma, is planning on sacrificing herself to see a powerful, invisible dragon to save her people. Makoto offers to help her, and she takes him home, where Emma trains him with her magic and levels him up. Surprisingly, he is in level 1. He sneaks off the next day, writing a letter to Emma promising to save her from the dragon. On his way, trying to practice, he mistakenly hits the abode of the dragon. They start to fight. He was able to see the invisible dragon. There, Makoto discovers his power and successfully defeats the dragon. The dragon accesses his memory and shows him one of his more interesting memories of when his crush, Hasegawa, asked him out. Due to his newfound power, the dragon, whose ability is to manipulate space, read other people's memories, and specializes in illusion, decides to be his servant and makes a contract with him. Afterwards, the dragon takes the form of a lady. After taking a lady's form, the dragon takes him to her Demi-plane, a space she created, which was formerly dark, but due to Makoto's power, it transforms into a fertile land. Makoto suggests turning the place into a city. They leave the Demi-plane, whose wall ends by a mist created by the dragon. Emma finds Makoto without recognizing the dragon, who has permanently taken the form of a lady. She talks him into not fighting the dragon. The dragon introduces herself as Makoto's new servant, and Emma ends up taking them home. Emma's species throws a celebration party for Makoto to thank him for saving them from the dragon. During the celebration, the dragon convinces the chief to move into her Demi-plane. The next morning, the people get ready and inform Makoto of the new plan. He declines, stating that demons might attack them. The dragon's little fragment jokingly offers to kick them off. They move to the Demi-plane, and the dragon asks them to build a large town. During the process, one of the orcs gets hurt, and Makoto uses his healing power and sting ability to cut down an unmovable tree, and hurts himself. He then discovers that he can't use his healing power on himself. Meanwhile, a hungry, blood-sucking giant spider is on the loose, and it attacks an elder dwarf who gets saved by the dragon. It attacks Makoto due to his bleeding hand. The spider is attracted to blood. Makoto feeds the spider till it gets satisfied with his blood, and Makoto sustains an injury and loses consciousness. The spider, who is now relieved, is pleased with Makoto, and the dragon suggests to her to become the servant of Makoto. The spider makes a contract with an unconscious Makoto and also transforms into a lady. She explains how she forms a contract with him, and Makoto gets angry that a contract is meant to be agreed upon and that she has done it without his approval. The dragon, spider, and the elder dwarf decide to bring their own species onto the Demi-plane. Makoto accepts and plans to follow in his parents' footsteps and finds a human village. The spider and the dragon request to be named, and Makoto calls the dragon Tumo and the spider Mio. Tumo and Mio, including Baron, the elder dwarf, bring in their species. They cast a vote and decide to call Makoto Young Master. During the search for a human village, he finds a wandering young lady. Makoto is happy and tries to talk to her. She calls him a monster and flees, shouting for help. Makoto follows her steps, almost entering her town, but is almost attacked by the people who seem not to understand his language. Disappointingly, he escapes using his power. He later finds out through Tumo and Mio that he has a powerful mana that makes him look like a demon outside. For months, he learned the language of humans. He also finds a great blacksmith for the dwarf to make equipment to wear so it can suppress his mana. Finally, he goes to the village called Zetsuya. With Tumo and Mio, he takes some fruit from the Demi-plane, pretending to be a merchant who comes from a trading company. They get leveled up in a guild. Tumo and Mio are on levels 1300 and 1500, and Makoto remains in level 1 and gets registered in the village. At night, they get a room in a hotel, and Makoto tells Tumo to guard the goods they bought since they are being followed, and goes out to eat with Mio. After eating, they find a wandering little girl who asks for help since she has been kicked out of her home. They help her by allowing her to stay in the room with them. The human village smells a bit fishy to them. Tumo kills the thieves who try to steal their goods and keeps one for interrogation. The little girl they find asks them to help find her elder sister. Makoto sends Tumo and Mio to find the sister, who looks very much like his earthly crush, Hasegawa. He looks into the surviving thief's memory. He finds out that the little girl is being placed as bait to steal from them so she can save her sister, who is captive. Tumo and Mio find the girl's sister, who is almost dying, and save her. Almost getting out, they meet the strongest man in the village called Ace. They tried not to show off their power, but he crossed his limit by making a jest of Makoto. They attack him and his men, but destroy half the village property. Afterwards, Tumo and Mio argue about who is the strongest and destroys the rest of the village properties and receives some punishment from Makoto. Makoto sends Tumo off to practice harder. They go to the forest to settle down in the village and meet all sorts of monsters, which Mio always attacks, and the adventurer collects the useful body parts so they can sell them. The final one is the fierce Ruby, which Mio refuses to attack, making Makoto do it instead. They get to Tusei, and Makoto re-registers. He finds a job offer from a company called Rembrandt, where the eyes of a ruby are being found. He collects some from the bodies of the monsters they killed, and removes the useful part from the adventures. At dinner that night, Toa warns him about trading with the company because bad things happen to those who trade with them. He goes back to check on the Demi-plane and sees it progressing well. The dwarf builds him a protective jacket for safety. Unable to reach Tumo, he goes to Tusei alone to meet the client who owns Rembrandt. Unfortunately, he refuses to trade with him. After persuading the man known as Patrick Rembrandt by showing him Ruby's eyes, he accepts to trade with him. Makoto questions him about his plan for the Ruby's eye. Patrick tells him about his wife and children who are being affected by a disease called the Level 8 disease. Makoto offers to help by bringing an alchemist. Patrick accepts and pays him with a signed receipt, and Makoto goes to register with the Merchants Guild. After passing the so-called hard test in just one day, they ask him to come back the next day for his card. Tumo sneaks back to the Demi-plane without informing Makoto. After her return, Emma forces her to join Mio to translate Makoto's memory into writing. Makoto goes back to the Demi-plane and meets Tumo's little fragment and talks about the illusory town where he plans on starting his trading business. He meets Tumo and Mio fighting as usual and takes them to Tusei along with him and contacts the alchemist Guy. The following day, he takes him to Rembrandt's company. Meanwhile, some adventurers are planning on killing Makoto for taking up the job. The scene opens with Patrick and his assistant killing the witch doctor. Makoto takes the alchemist's Guy to Rembrandt, and they successfully create a medicine which is called ambrosia from the ruby's eyes. Patrick tries giving it to his wife, but gets injured by her. Makoto helps him by using his power to retrain his wife and daughters, who get better after taking the medicine. When Patrick asks for his identity, he tells a lie and calls himself a merchant in training. After leaving, he meets up with Tumo and Mio. Suddenly, some adventurers confront them, threatening to kill them for taking up the Rembrandt job. Makoto makes Mio step back to avoid destruction and attacks them with Tumo, leaving only the leader because Tumo checks his memory and finds some happy kids. He explains that he is defending some of the orphans that were killed after working for the Rembrandt company because he was encouraged by the witch doctor to take some revenge. Makoto tells him to confess and apologize to the Rembrandt company, which he does, and makes him retire as an adventurer. Surprisingly, Patrick didn't hesitate to forgive him. Makoto tells Tumo to give him a parting gift, which is a sword, and Tumo employs him as her spy. Tumo finds out that Patrick is not entirely a good person and concludes that he probably deserves the witch doctor's judgment. Afterwards, Makoto goes back to the Demi-plane. Emma reports some problems with the occupant of the Demi-plane as the warriors have lost confidence due to fighting with Makoto. Makoto makes his investigation and finds it true. He, however, seeks solutions as Tumo makes them fight with each other to reveal the fighting tactics to one another. together. They make it a law to do an individual match once every week to improve their skill to rank them. They decided to do the Demi-plane ranking after 3 months. Makoto goes to Tusei with his servant. The guild asks Makoto to bring in some trained adventurers to Tusei. Makoto agrees and commands Tumo to train Toa and the other adventurer. Tumo successfully trains them well and takes them to the guild, and they become really great there. Afterwards, Makoto sends Mio to get an ambrosia flower so it could become one of their trade. He goes to Rembrandt to rent a shop to start his trading company to easily get an espionage. Patrick agrees and decides to find a space for them. The scene shows some adventurers going to steal into a forest called Tenakar Forest, which is guided by another species of human who attacks them. Meanwhile, all the species on the Demi-plane throw a huge party for the successful establishment of the Demi-plane and get to thank Makoto for his help. Tumo and Mio find out that Makoto is unintentionally killing himself by diffusing his consciousness when playing with an arrow. Therefore, his mana is increasing, and that is, his mana is on the same level with the goddess, and this makes the Demi-plane increasing, and if the goddess finds out, he will try his best to exterminate him. They plan to control his manners, and he also decides to use his Kai to hide some of his power inside the Demi-plane. One night, he meets a prostitute who tries to seduce him. This angers Tumo and Mio, who is now obsessed with Makoto and tries raping him. He escapes them. Afterwards, he goes to the Tenakar Forest with Mio to talk to the owner of the forest, but unfortunately, some adventurer plans to steal it. The guards of the forest attack them. Makoto summons Tumo, since Mio becomes uncontrollable and her hunger increases. Tumo refuses. At first angry that Makoto hangs out with Mio, Makoto begs Tumo, and she tells him what to do, including feeding Mio his blood to stop her hunger. Makoto offers to talk to the human species, and they lead him to the elder and meet Nilgistori, the chief's son. Adono, who seems weird and questions their skills in fighting the guards off, Makoto tells a lie by introducing himself as a merchant. Not believing them, Adono leaves the meeting. They provide a place to stay and also meet the master of the forest guard called Mondo, who Mio knocks off for shaking her master for 32 seconds and names him the 32-second pervert. Makoto instructs Mio to investigate Adono and Mondo and confirm information on whether Mondo is still alive. Mio finds out that Madono is possessed by something and Adono is connected to the demons. He asks Mio to switch with Tumo on the Demi-plane. Later that night, the species of the Tenakar Forest entertain Makoto, and Mondo turns into a demon called Lich. He defeats the demon, binds him, and sends him to the Demi-plane. Makoto finds out that the species of the Tenakar Forest plan to kill him. They apologize to him after Tumo introduces him as her master. Makoto goes back to the Demi-plane and questions the Lich, who explains that he entered Adono's body to become a giant who can gain access to any part of the world he wants. Tumo explains that it is really impossible and only a few people can do that. Tumo gives the Lich a reason to become Makoto's servant, and they also form a contract. However, the Lich permanently takes the form of a man. Suddenly, they hear an explosion outside the Demi-plane, and Tumo starts to bleed and lose consciousness. Makoto makes Mio stop Tumo bleeding and takes Lich to the site of the explosion. Makoto and Lich join their powers together and heal some of the people who are not at the center of the explosion. Angrily, he gains access to one of the adventurers who survived the explosion and watches how they steal some goods in the illusory town and attack some of them, including Tumo's fragment. They try stealing an explosive ring, which explodes and kills some of them, including a tomb fragment. Makoto angrily attacks the lady adventurer who survives the explosion. He cuts off her hands and kills her, then cries. He blames himself for trusting the adventurers and creating a burial for the dead ones. Afterwards, he names the Lich Shiki and Tumo recovers. He sends some transformed Alki to Tusaj to spy on Tusaj and tighten the security of the Demi-plane. He visits Rembrandt's company and decides to leave the Demi-plane and handle everything for his servants and tells Patrick the truth about himself. He gives Tumo and Mio a parting gift of his memory and decides to take Shiki along with him. On his way, he vanishes and finds himself in another place with two humans who have taken the demon's side. They attack him suddenly and cut off 2 of his fingers. The 2 humans named Sophia and Mitsuru Gai, who lead the other demons who are planning to fight war with humans, believe that the goddess empowered Makoto. He proves them wrong and fights with them. After fighting intensively for a long time, Makoto beats them and they both get stranded on a river with Sophia naked and Mitsuru Gai losing a leg. Makoto discovers that the goddess tried forcing him into fighting the demon and promises to always be prepared. He decides to go to the academy with Shiki to study and learn the basics of magic. Tumo and Mio decide to follow him. Makoto gets worried about the goddess finding out about Tumo and Mio and decides to keep them safe instead. They both agree to stay hidden. Tumo makes another young fragment of herself to replace the former one and shows it to Makoto. Tumo recruits the species from Tinnarak Forest into the Demi-plane, and Makoto's illusory city gets completed and gets merchants to trade with them as Mio and Tumo look after it. Makoto later finds out that both demons and humans suffered a lot of casualties in the battleground where the goddess dropped him off because he deposited all of his mana on them. He plans on following in his parents' footsteps since he won't be meeting them yet. Do you think the goddess will later find out about Tumo and Mio, or will Makoto ever leave the Itseki world? We'll bring you that and more. For now, kindly like this video and subscribe to our channel so we can bring you more videos like this. Take care and stay safe.